My name is Ava, and I was a cynic when it came to love. I had built my small graphic design business from the ground up, and my life was a fortress of independence and careful planning. Then, I met Julian. He was a whirlwind, a handsome, charismatic investor who swept into my life with an intensity that left me breathless. He saw my ambition not as a threat, but as an aphrodisiac. After a dizzying 3-month romance, he proposed on a rooftop overlooking the city lights. I, the woman who had a 5-year plan for everything, abandoned all logic and said yes. My friends were worried. "It's too fast," they warned, but I was sure. This was the epic love story I had secretly been waiting for. Our honeymoon was a fantasy brought to life. A private, overwater villa in the Maldives, surrounded by nothing but turquoise water and impossible blue skies. It was perfect. Almost too perfect. On our 3rd day, Julian went for a long solo scuba dive. I was relaxing in the villa, trying to find a playlist on his laptop, which he had uncharacteristically left open. I clicked on a folder, and a password prompt appeared. Strange. I jokingly typed in my own birthday, and my heart stopped when the folder opened. It wasn't filled with business files, it was filled with me. There were dozens of folders, meticulously organized. One contained surveillance photos of me, taken weeks, even months, before we had accidentally met at that art gallery. There were pictures of me walking my dog, leaving my office, having coffee with friends. Another folder contained a complete financial workup. My business assets, my personal savings, my inheritance from my late father. The most terrifying folder was labelled Project Nightingale. Inside was a detailed psychological profile that listed my strengths, my fears, and my weaknesses. Craves intellectual validation. One note read, has a deep-seated fear of being ordinary. It was a blueprint of my soul. The final document was a project timeline. It detailed every stage of our relationship, initial contact, first date, building emotional trust. Each milestone was logged with cold, clinical precision. The final entry, dated the day of our wedding, read, Phase 1, Marriage and Asset Integration, complete, commence. Phase 2. I stared at the screen, the sound of the gentle waves outside suddenly sounding like a threat. This wasn't a marriage. It was a hostile takeover. My husband was a complete stranger, a predator who had studied me, targeted me, and was now, apparently, moving on to Phase 2. And I was trapped with him on a remote island, 1,000 miles from anyone who could help me. When Julian returned from his dive, tan and smiling, I had to give the performance of my life. I greeted him with a kiss, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mind screaming. Every loving word he said, every touch, was now tainted, a calculated move in a game I didn't understand. I had to play along, to be the loving, unsuspecting bride, while I desperately tried to figure out what Phase 2 was, and how to escape. The isolation of the villa, once so romantic, was now a terrifying trap. There was no one to talk to, nowhere to run. My only tool was his laptop, which I could only access when he was otherwise occupied. For the next 2 days, I lived on a knife's edge, searching his files in frantic, stolen moments while he was swimming or on the phone. I needed to understand his motive. My own assets were significant, but not enough to warrant such an elaborate, long-term deception. It had to be something else. The answer was in a deeply encrypted subfolder I almost missed. It took me hours to bypass the security, using a trick my tech genius father had taught me years ago. The folder contained research, not on me, but on him, my father. My dad had been a brilliant software engineer who died suddenly 5 years ago. He had left me his small tech company, which I had sold off, unable to manage it myself. The company was sold for a modest sum because its most valuable asset, a revolutionary data compression patent my father had been working on, was declared invalid due to a supposed technical flaw right before the sale. Julian hadn't just researched my father. He had obsessed over him. He had downloaded every piece of research my dad had ever published, and in a hidden notes file, I found his thesis. Julian didn't believe the patent was invalid. He believed my father, a known eccentric, had hidden the final, working key to the patent somewhere, a failsafe to prevent it from being stolen. And he was convinced that I, as my father's only heir, either knew where it was or had access to it. Phase 2 was to manipulate me into revealing the location of a patent potentially worth billions. My marriage wasn't just a fraud, I was the key to a treasure hunt, and Julian was not going to let me go until he found his prize. The knowledge was both terrifying and empowering. I finally understood the game. Now, I had to figure out how to play it better than he did. I knew I couldn't just escape the island. He was watching me too closely. I had to give him what he wanted, or at least make him think I was. That night, I staged a tearful, drunken confession. I told him I was overwhelmed, that I missed my father, and that his death had left so many things unresolved. Then, I let the secret slip. I told him my father had left me a key to a safe deposit box in Geneva with a cryptic note. "For when you're ready to finish my life's work." I told him I had been too scared to see what was inside. Julian's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam he couldn't hide. He took the bait completely. "Ava, my love," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "You don't have to do this alone. We'll go together. We'll fly to Geneva as soon as we leave here. We're a team." It was the out I needed. The moment our plane touched down in a public international airport, his power over me was diminished. While he was busy making arrangements for our trip to Switzerland, I executed my own plan. I accidentally left my phone in a taxi. Upset, I told him I needed to go to a local electronics store to buy a new one immediately. Once inside the crowded store, I didn't buy a phone. I slipped out the back exit, jumped into a pre-booked car I had arranged from the hotel, and went straight to the police, and then to the embassy. There was no safe deposit box in Geneva. The real key to my father's patent was a complex cipher hidden in the lines of his favorite poetry book, a book that had been sitting on my shelf the entire time. While Julian was on the island, I had spent my nights not just searching his laptop, but solving my father's final puzzle. I had already photographed the key and emailed it to my father's old patent lawyer from the hotel's business center. When Julian arrived at our designated meeting spot, ready for our trip to Geneva, he wasn't met by his loving wife. He was met by detectives. My testimony, combined with the evidence from his own laptop, the illegal surveillance, the detailed plans for a fraudulent marriage was more than enough. He was a con man, a predator, and his game was finally over. I annulled the marriage, and with the help of my father's lawyer, I used that lost patent to relaunch my father's company, this time with me as the CEO. Julian had targeted me because he thought I was a weak link to a hidden fortune. He never realized that the greatest thing my father left me wasn't a patent. It was the intelligence and the strength to outsmart a monster.